A former top national security official is warning of potentially more political violence like what we saw on January 6th.
This was, in effect, a dress rehearsal for something that could be happening near term in 2022, 2024. We've got election cycles here that will heighten the tensions. And once people start talking about violence, once a threshold is crossed, we're in a danger zone.
That was Fiona Hill on Face the Nation yesterday. The comments come after former President Trump's lawyers told his aides to defy subpoenas from the House Select Committee investigating the Capitol riot last week. Now, to talk more about this is CBS News legal contributor and former federal prosecutor Keir Dougall. So, Keir, this is really sort of interesting because we know a number of subpoenas were issued, but we have no idea who will comply with those subpoenas, whether they be individuals or whether they'll come forward with documents. We just heard from one former Trump official about her fears surrounding more potential violence. Is there anything that the Department of Justice has done or can do to prevent that?
Sure, and we've seen it already. Federal law enforcement has gone to great lengths to charge and prosecute hundreds of folks who were involved in the January 6th riot and insurrectionary attempts. And those prosecutions, those charges will act, one would hope, at least on rational people, as a deterrent. We've already seen sentences that ought to cause, ordinary people who are reasonable, to pause. Sentences that, involve at least months, even for the sort of basic obstruction of the January 6th electoral count proceeding. We've seen them in the neighborhood of 8 months, month and a half. These are, just for standing on the Capitol steps and breaking into the building and taking a selfie. So the more violent behavior, as that gets charged and sentenced, I expect we'll see even longer and more significant prison terms. These should deter future individuals from doing this again. And obviously, you're taking the actual people who were involved in January 6th and you're punishing them.
So, we heard the former President Trump say in regards to these subpoenas that he was going to exert executive privilege, but he actually can't do that. The only people that can do that are the people who are currently sitting in the Oval Office, the Biden administration. So the Biden administration says that it will not be asserting executive privilege for the Trump White House documents from January 6th. Does the former president, President Trump, have any other legal route to block the Select Committee from getting its hands on those files?
Well, he can urge the witnesses who are receiving these subpoenas, individuals like Mr. Bannon, to assert any other privileges that they might have. Those privileges could range from the Fifth Amendment privilege to the attorney-client privilege. He can urge those things. Anne Marie, I agree with you. As far as executive privilege is concerned, the better arguments are that the current president is the person who should wield the privilege, is the custodian of the privilege, should decide whether or not the privilege should be interposed as a barrier to learning the truth. That's what a privilege does. It stops us and the courts and the public from learning the truth on a claim that there is some larger and more important value at stake. But the person who is best positioned to make that decision on behalf of the United States, in my view, is the current president. And as you say, President Biden, at least for this first set of questions, has said that the government will not exert the executive privilege here, which should clear that path.
And so essentially the former president has to ask his people, the people who he worked with, to kind of do him a solid, if you will. And Steve Bannon's attorney says that his client is going to be following the direction of former President Trump's legal team by refusing to comply with the Select Committee subpoena. Trump's lawyers say that records and testimony are, quote, potentially protected from disclosure by, once again, we hear executive or other privileges. You sort of outlined what I guess those other privileges could be, but is this legally accurate?
Yeah, so some of these questions are, subject to litigation. One path that these may be resolved is the Congress could sue to enforce the subpoena. Mr. Bannon could potentially sue to prevent enforcement of the subpoena. Congress could refer, if Congress decides that the subpoena has been refused to be complied with, that Mr. Bannon is in contempt, Congress could refer Mr. Bannon to federal prosecutors for potential criminal prosecution. And then the sort of final remedy that Congress has, which it hasn't used for close to 90 years now, is Congress itself could send its sergeant at arms out to arrest Mr. Bannon for contemptuously refusing to respond to the subpoena. Because that tool has not been used for so long, I would expect that the way it will proceed is there'll be negotiations, perhaps litigation in court. I would think that even a criminal referral here is farther. It would be one of the secondary. It would be one of the options that Congress would reach for perhaps later. But those are the options that Congress has to enforce information demands against folks like Mr. Bannon, who the committee investigating January 6 believes has relevant information.
And so just really quickly, is this the way that Congress, can show its sort of power, if you will, over private citizens, the sort of stuff that you just listed?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And yes, look, our Congress deals with the most important questions that our nation has, and they need to have information. We need to get, in order to pass laws that are effective and that are targeted at the problems that we face. But Congress, in order to do that, Congress has to, have information. They have to make knowing. It's better to make informed decisions than to make uninformed decisions. That's why we have, and Congress has this power to gather information, but because people aren't always cooperative, they need a method to enforce it. And so that's why there's this menu of options that Congress has. We'll have to see what Congress does in this particular instance.
Keir Dougall, always great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie.